I never thought a few inches of grass could start a war. But then Karen from across the street called the cops on me, over the height of my lawn. I stood there, dumbfounded, as she ranted about rules I didn't even know existed. Neighbors whispered, the HOA took sides, and suddenly my quiet suburban life felt like a battlefield. How could something so small spiral into chaos? And more importantly, what lengths would I have to go to just to protect my own home? Life in Willow Creek was quiet, the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes on wide streets and neighbors waved from their porches. For me, it had been a dream come true, a modest two-story home with a sunlit backyard, a small garden, and a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Mornings were calm, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the scent of blooming roses, and evenings were for unwinding on the porch swing, watching the sky turn gold. I took pride in my little patch of grass and the way my garden bloomed in careful, imperfect rows. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, just a home I loved. Most neighbors were friendly enough, sharing nods and occasional small talk over fences. But there was one exception. Karen lived 3 houses down, a figure whose smiles rarely reached her eyes. She was always impeccably dressed, perfectly manicured, and suspiciously attentive to every detail in the neighborhood. Something about the way she surveyed lawns and driveways made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Everyone has quirks, right? Still, subtle signs hinted at trouble. HOA flyers tucked under doors, emails about community standards, and offhand comments from neighbors made me pause. Some rules seemed harmless, others felt oddly specific, like targeting someone who didn't fit the perfect mold. I never thought I would be the one under scrutiny until one sunny afternoon, a letter arrived that would change everything. The first inkling of a dispute, a tiny spark over something as trivial as grass, began to creep into my life. The first letter seemed harmless enough. A polite note from the HOA, reminding me that my grass was slightly above recommended height. I laughed it off. Surely, it was just a friendly nudge, not a threat. But as the days passed, the tone shifted. Karen, the ever-watchful neighbor, appeared with increasing frequency on my lawn, peering over the fence, clipboard in hand, as if documenting every blade of grass. Her judgmental gaze felt like a spotlight, turning my quiet backyard into a stage for scrutiny. Then came the next letter, stamped with urgency. The HOA demanded that I trim my lawn to exact specifications, citing vague rules about community appearance standards. The wording was deliberately threatening, leaving no room for negotiation. My mild amusement turned into concern. Why would anyone care so much about my yard? Soon, I realized this wasn't about grass, it was about control. Every day became a small battle. I mowed early in the morning, only to find notes on my door warning of non-compliance by evening. Fines appeared in the mail, small at first, $20, then $50, then $100, but escalating quickly. Karen seemed to delight in these letters, her satisfaction unmistakable when she passed by. Other neighbors whispered in hushed tones, some supportive, others wary, afraid to step on HOA toes. The tension in the community was palpable, a small spark had ignited into a creeping wildfire. I tried to reason with the HOA. Emails went unanswered, phone calls redirected, and online portals offered nothing but automated responses. Every effort to clarify the rules or request leniency was met with silence or passive-aggressive reminders that I was expected to comply promptly. My frustration grew, transforming into a simmering determination. I wasn't going to let my home be taken hostage by arbitrary rules or a neighbor's obsession with perfection. Then the harassment escalated. Karen began documenting every minor infraction: a slightly overgrown bush, a garden tool left out too long, a misplaced potted plant. She submitted detailed reports to the HOA, citing obscure clauses and threatening further fines. My once peaceful backyard became a minefield. I couldn't enjoy mornings with coffee or evenings on the porch without worrying if I was about to be penalized again. The absurdity was maddening, but the fear of legal or financial consequences made every small choice tense. Friends and family began noticing the change. I was tense, checking my mailbox with dread, and losing sleep over the mounting pressure. I confided in a neighbor, who warned me that HOA battles could drag on for months or even years, consuming energy, money, and sanity. But despite the warnings, I refused to back down. Every note, every fine, every surveillance-like visit from Karen only fueled my resolve. The next major incident hit like a thunderclap. One morning, I stepped outside to find a citation taped to my front door, this time for improper lawn edging, something I had never even considered before. Karen was there again, smiling thinly, as if the world were her chessboard and I was just a pawn. My heart sank as I realized that this petty dispute had turned into a full-blown obsession and that I was the target. The tension escalated further when the HOA introduced a third-party inspector, who arrived unannounced to photograph my property and submit a report. I watched helplessly as my private space was invaded, every corner scrutinized and judged. It wasn't just about grass anymore, it was about power. Every rule, every fine, every glance from Karen felt like a calculated move in a game I hadn't signed up to play. Then came the social aspect. Some neighbors began taking sides, gossip circulating about the out-of-control homeowner versus the community's moral guardian. Subtle notes left on my door, whispered conversations in the cul-de-sac, and sideways glances at community events made it clear my reputation was under attack. Every day was a test of patience, endurance, and sanity. I began documenting everything: photos, letters, emails, realizing that if this escalated further, I might need proof to defend myself. And escalate it did. The HOA, emboldened by Karen's reports, threatened additional fines and legal action. I received formal notices indicating potential liens on my property if compliance wasn't achieved. The sheer absurdity of it made me want to laugh and cry. How could something as trivial as a few inches of grass spiral into financial threats and public scrutiny? But I refused to let fear win. Late nights were spent researching HOA bylaws, county ordinances, and precedents where homeowners successfully challenged overreach. I discovered loopholes, ambiguities, and the occasional clause that worked in my favor. With every discovery, my confidence grew, though the tension never truly dissipated. Karen's presence loomed like a shadow over every decision I made, and the HOA's cold bureaucracy ensured that each move required caution. Then came the moment that truly changed the game. Karen submitted a formal complaint alleging that my neglect of the lawn constituted a violation serious enough to involve local authorities. I was stunned when, one afternoon, flashing lights appeared at the end of my driveway. Police officers, summoned over something so petty, knocked on my door. My pulse raced as I tried to explain calmly, rationally, and truthfully that no law had been broken, only an HOA regulation was in question. The absurdity of standing there, heart-pounding, facing the law because of grass height, was not lost on me. Neighbors peered from windows, whispers circulating about the confrontation. Social pressure mounted. The conflict was no longer confined to private letters and backyard inspections, it had entered the public sphere, and the stakes felt higher than ever. I realized that winning this battle wouldn't be about mowing neatly, it would require strategy, patience, and, perhaps, exposing the ridiculousness of the system. Every day became a calculated effort, mowing precisely to code, photographing every corner, keeping a detailed log of interactions, and preparing for the inevitable next move from Karen or the HOA. The tension never let up. Each moment was a cliffhanger. Would another fine arrive tomorrow? Would another neighbor side with Karen? Would the HOA escalate further? By the end of this period, the quiet peace of Willow Creek was gone. What had started as a minor gripe over grass had morphed into a psychological battlefield, testing my patience, resilience, and commitment to my home. And just when I thought I had reached the limits of absurdity, a new twist loomed on the horizon, one that would push the conflict to its breaking point. The tension that had been building for weeks, months even, finally reached a breaking point. The HOA had issued yet another notice, threatening legal action if my lawn and garden were not brought into full compliance within a week. Karen, predictably, had documented every inch of my property in her meticulously detailed dossier, which she submitted with an almost gleeful sense of moral victory. My mailbox felt like a battlefield, filled with warnings, threats, and increasingly absurd demands. Every day, my home, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for harassment and scrutiny. I had endured relentless fines, unsolicited inspections, and public whispers from neighbors whose loyalties seemed split. I had logged every letter, every email, every photo, preparing for the moment when the scales could finally tip in my favor. But I never expected the final confrontation to arrive like it did, in person, with an air of inevitability. It started on a scorching afternoon when the HOA scheduled a mandatory community compliance review at my house. 2 officers arrived, clipboard in hand, alongside Karen, whose smug smile cut sharper than any words. The entire cul-de-sac seemed to gather subtly in the background, drawn by the spectacle of bureaucracy and obsession colliding. I watched Karen point, whispering into an earbud as if narrating my failure for the entertainment of some invisible audience. I took a deep breath, forcing calm through the storm of anger and humiliation. No amount of pettiness, no thinly veiled moral superiority, could dictate my life. With every ounce of composure, I presented my evidence, HOA bylaws, county codes, and a precise photographic record proving my compliance. I explained, with measured clarity, that the violations she had obsessively documented were either non-existent or misinterpreted. The officers, who had arrived expecting a simple enforcement action, began to frown. Karen's confident smile faltered. The turning point came when I produced a legal precedent from another neighborhood dispute, showing that the HOA's rules were being enforced inconsistently, and that selective harassment violated both state regulations and community fairness standards. The officers glanced at each other, and for the first time, Karen's carefully constructed aura of power wavered. The smug certainty that had fueled her crusade began to crumble. Neighbors, who had watched quietly until now, began whispering, some nodding in approval, others exchanging shocked glances at Karen's rapidly shifting demeanor. I felt a surge of vindication, the hours of documentation, the stress, the fines, all culminating in this moment. Karen's voice, once sharp and commanding, faltered as she attempted to justify her actions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then, in a moment that felt almost cinematic, the HOA representative who had arrived with the authority to enforce penalties stepped back, pen hovering over the enforcement form, and said something I would never forget: "Based on this documentation, we cannot proceed. The violations are either unfounded or insufficient to warrant action." My heart leapt. Months of harassment, anxiety, and intimidation had been met with formal recognition that my compliance and integrity were unquestionable. Karen stood frozen, face flushed, mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. The officers left, leaving behind stunned neighbors and a quiet that seemed almost tangible. I walked across my lawn, feeling every inch of tension evaporate, the sun warm on my back. The petty war had reached its apex, and I had emerged not only unscathed but vindicated.